It has been some tough sledding for oil, well, all over the place, but in the United States generally, and in North Dakota specifically. I think one of the most recent statistics I saw reported by the Department of Energy that here in North Dakota, we have stopped production on a number of wells almost approaching 500,000 barrels a day, which would be about half of North Dakota's daily output. It's a big, big deal. That has ramifications for our economy, that has ramifications for real people in the state of North Dakota. There are families, there are individuals who are hurting. Less importantly, but not unimportant, is the fact that our state budget is going to be hurting as well. Our policymakers in our state have some very, very tough decisions ahead of them. In fact, as I record this, Governor Doug Burgum has released his preliminary budget guidelines for state agencies, and he's calling for some big cuts. And we're going to have some big cuts because North Dakota is very, very dependent on oil revenues. Now, we all know that part of the equation of what's happened is coronavirus, global pandemic that has impacted demand for oil. Demand has gone in the tank. People just aren't driving, right? You're not going to use it if you don't have to go anywhere. But another problem was a price war that broke out simultaneous to the pandemic, and these two things combined, I guess I've heard people call them a double black swan event. Well, it's been ugly for the oil industry, and the oil industry is very important in North Dakota, so therefore it's been ugly for North Dakota. Now, here to talk to me about that is one of the players in the pricing situation, Fahad Nazer. He is an official spokesman for the Embassy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Washington, D.C. He was appointed to that position for the embassy in January of last year, January 18th, 2019, so a little over a year on the job. Prior to that, he was an international fellow at the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations. He is an experienced political analyst. He is a recognized expert on political, social, and economic development in Saudi Arabia. He's also worked a lot with militant groups. Suffice it to say, Fahad, you're a pretty smart dude. Welcome, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
So let's talk about this situation. You heard my opening. North Dakotans are hurting. The national economy is hurting. And again, a lot of this is coronavirus. It is what it is. We're living with it. It's horrible. But some of it is prices. Now, there's a lot of frustration from North Dakotans about what we perceive from the American perspective as price manipulation, as an international oil cartel working in concert to manipulate the oil markets in order to harm Americans and harm North Dakotans, people in the part of the world where I'm from specifically. What's your response? Now, I'm not necessarily endorsing that point of view, but it's a not uncommon point of view. When you hear Americans talk that way, what's your response?
So I think a little context here is essential. So if you look at the history of the kingdom's oil policy going back over 40 years, the kingdom has always put a high premium on stable international energy markets. It has always promoted moderate prices that are fair to both producers and consumers, and it has stressed the importance of burden sharing among producers. Recently, as you know, Saudi Arabia orchestrated what was a historic OPEC Plus agreement that took place on April 12th, which reduced global production by 12.5 million barrels. We have also secured commitments from other nations in the G20 group, and we have ongoing talks with other nations, including the United States, to address steep declines in global demand. The United States is our most important strategic partner and ally in the world. It is our second biggest trading partner. What is good for the U.S. economy is good for Saudi Arabia. These low oil prices have hurt us as much as they have hurt the shale sector and the American economy. So we're actually doing everything we can to bring stability back to the global market.
There's obviously a lot of people who would disagree with that. One of them, I think, is our senator, Kevin Cramer. Now, as luck would happen, I have a weekly standing interview, or not weekly, but regular standing interview with Senator Kramer, and I actually interviewed him earlier this day. This podcast will be released on Monday. I interviewed him on Friday. That's when his podcast went out, and we talked in part about this issue, and I want to read you a quote from him, because this is how he feels about it. He says, Saudi Arabia and Russia are trying to crush us out of business. And he's saying essentially that your country is working in concert with Russia, not necessarily to burden share or to create a stable market, but to crush shale oil producers in the United States of America. What's your response to that? Because that's a United States, North Dakota, one of North Dakota's senators, one of 100 senators in Washington D.C., who is saying that, and he's been talking about potentially the United States withdrawing military support from your country. We have a significant military presence there, missile defense assets, not the least of which we've invested a lot in helping your country. And to be absolutely fair, your country has also assisted our country's interests as well. So that's been a two-way street, but there's a lot of hard feelings, and there's definitely a feeling that your country and your state-owned oil industry is out to get our domestic shale oil producers.
So we simply don't, that is simply, with all due respect, that's simply not the way we see it. Our history shows that we are promoters of free trade between countries. We believe in a global economy. We believe that free trade is good for all nations, and frankly, the pie is big enough to go around. We do not engage in policies to attack or to target any sector or any other economy or any sector of an economy, especially one like the United States, where, as I said earlier, it is one of our strongest partners and allies, and generally speaking, but it's also one of our biggest trading partners. So we fully understand that the shale sector and the energy sector in the United States is feeling the impact of the coronavirus, but frankly, the kingdom itself has also felt the impact of it. Our Ministry of Finance just issued a statement a few days ago saying that there will be a budget deficit this year for the government. Our revenues are down. At the same time, we have had to increase spending to help some of the sectors and the companies and the individuals that have been hard hit by the coronavirus. This is a global pandemic in every sense of the word. Obviously, It has been a public health crisis for the entirety of the international community, but it has also had a devastating impact globally, economically. And that's why when it comes to stabilizing energy markets, oil is an internationally traded commodity. And we felt that to address this steep decline in demand, which is estimated to be as much as 30% by some analysts, we needed a global response. And that is why we orchestrated this historic agreement that included 23 countries, by the way. There's a perception, I think, sometimes that this was simply a Saudi-Russian agreement with the United States playing an important role, but there's 23 countries were involved in this, and this is a global problem. It's a global challenge, and it needed a global response.
Yeah, and that is an important note. I think sometimes we get a little, when we talk about OPEC, we get a little myopic, thinking that means just a few countries when it's obviously a much larger organization than that. Let me, because I want to say, first of all, we're all human beings, right? I mean, we all have friends, family, neighbors, people we care about, and we all want them to succeed. We want our communities to flourish. We want our countries to be strong and to flourish and prosper. That's what we all want. Something you said earlier, though, is that Saudi Arabia believes in a free market, and I believe in a free market as well. But one of the things that I've been struggling with, and I've been a little bit of a free market absolutist. I have come back from that a little bit with some of our dealings with China, which I'm certainly you don't want to get into. It's another matter for another podcast. But one thing that gives me pause is there's a fundamental difference between the oil industry in Saudi Arabia and the oil industry in the United States of America. Here, it's made up of a lot of different companies. Some of them are gigantic, like Exxon. Some of them are very small, like a lot of the operators that operate in North Dakota are very small oil companies. In American politics, we talk about big oil, but there are small businesses. There are relatively small oil companies, and none of these are owned by the state. Now, our state and federal governments have, regulatory control and trade, control over trade policy and things like that. But for the most part, our industry is not owned by the government. It's not controlled by the government. President Trump can't necessarily issue an order and tell oil producers to stop producing. It's a function of the market. They make a decision. Whereas your country has a state-owned oil industry. And so you talk about free trade. I think there's a lot of Americans saying, well, yeah, but we're being asked to free trade with a state-owned company as private operators. That's a difficult thing to do at times, especially when, anything that's owned by the government can be used as a tool in politics.
Well, we do not use oil as a weapon. That is simply not how we conduct our oil policy. And as I said, the oil sector and oil revenues for the kingdom are very important. They are a bigger part of our economy than it is in the United States. So these ultra low, very low prices do not benefit us in the least bit. They've actually been very harmful, and we have had to adjust to that. And as I said, this is a global problem. It's a global commodity, and Saudi Arabia alone cannot fix this problem. That is why we worked very closely with the United States. We work closely with Russia, as well as the other 20 or so nations that are in the OPEC Plus group, to help bring some stability to this market. It has not been easy, but frankly, this pandemic has been unprecedented in many ways. Obviously, it has taken a tremendous toll in terms of public health. All the new regulations and the adjustments that we have all had to make have been unprecedented, have been very stressful, but it has also put tremendous pressure on global economies, and we fully understand that. That's why we're working very closely with the United States. Our leadership is talking to the administration. Our leadership and our ambassador here, Her Royal Highness Princess Rima bin Bandar, is speaking with leadership on the Hill, including with Senator Kramer. They have had at least a couple of phone conversations that were frank, but they were very constructive and very productive.
Yeah, and I think the senators where you and I are at, again, we're all human beings. We all want the best for our people, and we all want the best. I mean, I want Saudi Arabia to thrive too. I want you folks to do well, and I know you want us to do well. If I'm I have a big audience in North Dakota, and so there's a lot of people listening to this that have been affected by the downturn or are going to be affected by the downturn in oil here, and it's difficult to talk about this because the coronavirus is hanging out there, and it's not Saudi Arabia's fault, and it's not America's fault. This is something that's happening to all of us, and none of us created this situation, but it's having an impact on the oil industry. But for those who are out there who are saying, hey, Saudi Arabia, if you're an oil worker or maybe you own a business in an oil patch community and you're thinking, gosh, I'm being hurt by all this, talk to those people. What do you want from Saudi Arabia's perspective? What do you want those people to know about what your country is doing in this situation?
Well, Saudi Arabia and the United States have a long relationship. It goes back 75 years. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. It is one that is multidimensional. It has a political component. It has a military component. We work very closely on counterterrorism, but it's always had an economic component as well. The U.S. is our second biggest trading partner, as I mentioned earlier. There's a fair amount of business that goes both ways. American companies do business in Saudi Arabia. We have a lot of Saudi businesses doing business as well here in the United States. So what is good for you economically is good for the kingdom as well. We are doing everything we can, as we have done throughout our history. We have always put a very high premium on stability, not just for global markets and global oil markets, but even politically. We believe that stability is the key, certainly in the Middle East, where, as you know, unfortunately, it has been a region that arguably is known for its lack of stability. So we do everything we can to foster and to promote both political stability, economic stability. We believe that the two often go hand in hand. And I think our policy throughout the years, not just the past few months, but going back decades, reflects that. We believe in stable prices. We believe in moderate prices. We believe that what is good for certainly the United States is good for Saudi Arabia, and we work closely together on many, many fronts. And, I think this agreement that was signed on April 12th is beginning to pay dividends. We've seen prices stabilize a little bit, but ultimately things will not go back to normal until the international community acts and speaks with one voice and counters this horrific pandemic that has really challenged all of us. And but hopefully we're turning a corner.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the big thing, right? We need the coronavirus to go away so we can get back to business and get back to our normal way of life, of which oil is obviously a very big part of it. So what do we need? I mean, obviously we've signed this agreement. Things have stabilized, but you folks reached out to me for this interview, which I appreciate. I'm glad to talk to you, and I'm glad that you care about my audience and North Dakotans and talking to us, because I think that's a wonderful thing. I mean, as long as we're talking to each other, that's a good thing. From Saudi Arabia's perspective, what do we need to heal this? Because I think it's fair to say there's a rift. There's some hard feelings, maybe on both sides. Certainly on our side over here, there's some hard feelings. How do we heal this?
So I think it's good to take a long view of the relationship. As I said, the relationship dates back to February 14th, 1945.
Yeah,
this year,
like 75 years? Yeah, about 75 years. It's a long time.
Right. That marked the first meeting between the late King Abdulaziz Al Saud, the founder of modern-day Saudi Arabia, and the late President Franklin Delano Roosevelt aboard the USS Quincy. So ever since that time, in that 75-year span, the relationship has continued to strengthen and to broaden and to deepen under both Democratic and Republican administrations, I might add. So, people forget at this point, because it's been a few years, but the United States and Saudi Arabia worked very closely to defeat global communism. In 1990-91, Saudi Arabia and the United States fought side by side to expel Saddam Hussein's forces from Kuwait. More recently, in 2014 and continuing, Saudi Arabia and the United States, again, their troops worked closely and fought side by side to expel the terrorist group ISIS from Syria and Iraq. So we work on a number of fronts. Stabilizing energy markets is another one, but we also try to bring stability to the region overall. We work very closely together on countering Iran's malign activities in the region. And as I mentioned earlier, we work very, very closely on countering terrorist groups and extremist groups. That kind of cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the United States, I would argue, has saved the lives of thousands of people, not just in Saudi Arabia, but also in the United States and around the world.
Well, I think that history is important to recognize. Again, it goes back 75 years, and Saudi Arabia has often been our ally in stabilizing the Middle Eastern region, and the troubles there, the instability there often spills over into other parts of the world. It's a global concern, and Saudi Arabia has very often stood next to the United States. Senator Kramer obviously continues to have strong feelings, and I think he represents what a lot of North Dakotans and a lot of people from my part of the world feel. And again, part of this is being exacerbated by the virus. I wish that we could talk about this outside of that context, but we are where we're at. What I am really hoping for, because I agree with you when you said that there's enough pie to go around. Right, we can all have a share of the pie, and there's enough to go around. I agree with that. Shale oil in the United States of America has turned us into a different sort of player in the oil markets, our country, or the companies within our country, and it's really changed. It's hard to imagine. I don't know if you've ever been to North Dakota or our part of the world. It has been remarkable to watch as oil development has taken place, what has happened to communities in western North Dakota, places that were dying, that people were moving away from, people are moving back to. And we're seeing investments, we're seeing new buildings, we're seeing other sorts of investment come in. It's been a wonderful thing, and I think that's what drives a lot of the hard feelings here is we're scared that a lot of that's going to die. We're scared that we're going to go backwards on a lot of that. And I know that you have people in your country, too, who you also want to protect and you also want to make whole and keep together. And I mean, boy, two very different places, right? Saudi Arabia, North Dakota, Midwestern America. So sometimes we're very different, but I think a lot of times we all have the same goal. So again, I mean, are you guys planning any other outreach to us in this part of the world to continue talking to us and communicating with us and maybe finding a path forward that works for America and Saudi Arabia and all our other global neighbors?
Absolutely. I mean, we believe in constructive dialogue. This goes from the very top of our leadership with both His Majesty King Salman and His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but also our ambassador here, Princess Rima bin Bandar, has traveled, in fact, across much of the United States. She's only been in her position for a little over a year, but she has already visited a number of states. She is certainly engaging on a regular basis with leadership on the Hill, both Democratic and Republican. As I mentioned, she has had a number of phone calls with a number of senators from all producing states, including Senator Kramer, and it was a frank but productive discussion. Her Highness listened very carefully. We take these concerns very seriously, and this is something that we all need to. We need a global solution to address it because it's a global problem. It's not something that the United States is facing alone. It is something that Saudi Arabia has had to face, and every country around the world. I really can't think of a pandemic that has literally impacted every country in the world. But I think this is where we are today. I was reading something earlier today, an article that said Corona has spread to well over 184 countries, 85 countries around the world. That pretty much covers the globe. It really has highlighted the fact that we do live in an interconnected world. But I think it also that the solution, the way to deal with it, it's a global problem. We have to act together and get our resources together and think through that this is something we all need to be on the same page on. And, this historic agreement was an example of that, of what happens when leaders realize the gravity of a situation. And like I said, the economic impact of Corona on the global economy has been devastating. It's been obviously very devastating to the energy sector because, as you said, people are not traveling, they're not driving, they're not doing what they used to do. So we're not living our lives. The economy has suffered, so.
We're not living our lives. We're staying inside, which it's not great. But except in winter in North Dakota, you have to come to North Dakota in winter sometime and experience it. It is something that's definitely when you want to stay inside. But it's not winter anymore. It's spring. It's beautiful outside. We should be outside.
But I'd love to come. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance, but I hear it's a lovely place. I'll take that as an official invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. You're invited anytime you want to come out. I love North Dakota. I think it's a wonderful place. It's a special place, and I encourage everybody to come. Fahad, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Anytime you guys want to talk, I'm all ears because I think it's important that we listen to each other.
Great, thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'd love to get back on your show to continue this conversation some more.
Definitely.